Hello, and welcome to Retroscoping, a podcast tracing the evolution of feature animation. We're journeying through the films of the studio that started it all, Walt Disney Studios. This week, we're delving into Disney film number 11, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. But first, a little bit about us. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Alexa.
Alexa, why are we qualified to do this podcast?
Well, we are currently recording during the midst of coronavirus, so we are locked inside of our home, and there is nothing else to do.
We'll probably just go ahead and finish the entire rest of the series over the course of the next 4 weeks.
Who knows? But this is also the perfect opportunity for everyone to join us just watching Disney movies.
You know you've got nothing better to do. That party? Canceled. That conference? Canceled. That trip to Disneyland? Also canceled.
That's so sad. I think, honestly, for me, the moment that I realized, things were getting very, very serious was the moment that Disneyland put out their news that they were closing for 2 weeks, which, rain or shine, windstorm or whatever, Disneyland is always open. So if they are shuttering not just for 1 day, but for 2 weeks, and, at this point, we don't know how long that will truly be, but, officially, they said 2 weeks, that blew my mind. Didn't matter that everyone else is oh my gosh, they're closing sports events. It was Disneyland that got me.
Well, in the meantime, as the world goes crazy, we have The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad.
And now you have enough time to watch it!
Although, even locked inside with nothing better to do, I'm not sure this one is worth your time.
Hey, this is the end of the package films, so after this we get to Cinderella, so this is the last one.
Yay!
We're saved! Until Winnie the Pooh in 1977. But those are fun, and it's Winnie the Pooh. These are, this is one I don't think I've ever actually watched. I've seen parts of Sleepy Hollow on TV, but never really all in one sitting, I feel like. So
yeah, its imagery is familiar to me, but I would be hard-pressed to think of a time I actually sat down to watch it.
Yeah.
Well, this film was released on October 5th, 1949, and it grossed about $1,200,000 in domestic rentals and about $1,625,000 worldwide. It actually won a Golden...
I love that this is new information to you because I put together the outline. But yes, Nathan, in fact, it did win a Golden Globe for Best Cinematography.
Perhaps you want to do a Did You Know?
No, I want everyone to know that you didn't know this. Also was very surprised to find this information, but I found it on several websites. I'm going to go ahead and believe them. I didn't know Golden Globes had been around that long, actually.
Yeah, I would have assumed that by definition animated films were not eligible for cinematography awards. I would argue that some animated films should be eligible for the award, but I would figure the lack of, say, lights in the category about writing with light probably was disqualifying.
But you're still using, composition and layout, and you are thinking about how you want to light things. You're just doing it with paint and artificial light. It's still artificial light. Yes, yeah. It qualifies.
Apparently. I mean, I know that a lot of recent Pixar and DreamWorks films have brought in Roger Deakins, one of the most legendary cinematographers working today, to consult on their films and help them to better understand camera and light work. So apparently they should have consulted with 1940s Disney. Also cinematography award winners.
Yeah, it is a little confusing to me, though, because this is technically, two shorter films stuck together, but the entire film then wins Best Cinematography, and if, were both segments up to snuff, or was one just particularly fantastic, and if so, which one?
I have to admit, now this makes me think I should have watched it a little more closely, because while I think it's a good-looking film, and I think it is a bit more stately than some of the stuff we've been watching thus far, and feels like we're working back up to traditional Disney fairy tales. I mean, it's a good-looking film, but it doesn't strike me as an especially ambitious-looking film.
Oh, So while I was researching, I came across a very interesting quote that I am going to share with you now, because we both know who Leonard Maltin is.
We do. We took his class.
Yes, he is a film historian and a film critic, for those of you who may not be aware of him. He definitely knows a lot about Disney history, and in his book, The Disney Films, he has a quote that says that this film is one of Disney's most beguiling animated features. The Wind in the Willows, in particular, has some of the finest work the studio ever did.
Was I just in a bad mood when I watched it?
I think
was
we were
too
very
tired?
sleepy when we watched this. We were like, sleepy? Sleepy Hollow. Makes sense. So the movie did feel a bit long.
It did. A bit long.
It might be worth a rewatch for the art. Like, looking, just kind of scrolling back through the movie right before we recorded, like, the art is beautiful. Those backgrounds in Sleepy Hollow, that kind of Golden Book, Mary Blair-esque backgrounds, like, those are fantastic. And there are a lot of fun things happening with the character design. Aside from Katrina, everyone else besides Katrina is really visually interesting.
Ichabod is certainly a very memorable design, and they have really created a whole visual language for how his impossibly gangly limbs move.
Yeah, and also, like, what I found kind of interesting is that Brom seems like a precursor for Gaston. Mm-hmm. Especially visually.
Yeah, and built exactly the same way.
Well, and also he's the town hero and, like, pulls a cork out of a giant barrel full of presumably alcohol, and just other things like that make him very much like Gaston. But Katrina also seems very closely an ancestor to Cinderella, who's going to literally come up next. Her design is so close to what they end up with for Cinderella.
Well, it seems like Disney's always practicing for the next thing, especially with the shorts.
Which is good because, I mean, there are a couple frames where she did look a little wonky. She wasn't, like, fully formed Cinderella yet. She's a little amorphous.
And I will say, I mean, I think the Headless Horseman really is a striking design, and I love the way that he is essentially a black silhouette with highlights. He and his horse that have a very distinctive look that looks nothing like the other characters of the rest of the world. And it's very creepy and effective, even if by the end of the very long comical chase scene, it's lost some of its power.
Yeah, but I do think they hit that initial sighting of him so well that, yeah.
It leaves an impression.
Exactly. Sure. Precisely.
So the film opens with a return to the traditional Disney storybook, a way of suggesting, here we are, more fairy tales like you remember from all our greatest hits.
Yeah, but we're definitely back on that exact same set from Fun and Fancy Free, except there's no Jiminy Cricket this time, and I was very disappointed. He did not visit us this time either.
We've probably seen the last of Jiminy, haven't we?
Probably. Which means we've graduated. We no longer need a conscience.
He was a terrible conscience anyway. So, This film is the adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, but we actually start with the adventures of Mr. Toad, adapted from Kenneth Grahame's Wind in the Willows, which is actually a much longer piece that contains a bunch of short stories about life in the woods and the animals that live there. But there is a through line in the book of the adventures of Mr. Toad, who is honestly fairly well represented by this film. He's not as distinctively British in the Disney version, but a lot of the characteristics, the manias, the absurd antics, the wild adventures, all of those are pretty faithful to the book. It's just that his manias are a bit less poetic in the Disney version. In the novel, he's given to really mystical, poetic, just, feasts of language as he describes the wonders of the motor car. So this short is kind of adapted, just following through those different tales of Mr. Toad within The Wind in the Willows.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I found pretty interesting, actually, is that when they adapted The Wind in the Willows from the book to this short, they ran up against something called the Hays Code, which during the later years of like the silent age of Hollywood and as we're kind of moving into talkies, there were a lot of complaints coming in that Hollywood was creating lewd content, and it was kind of like a time of scandal, and, you know, the media gets on top of that, and then people are outraged, and so the public cried out to the government to, you know, get Hollywood in line. And to kind of keep the government off their back, Hollywood went ahead and created a list of rules called the Hays Code, which was going to be kind of like a set of moral guidelines that the studios were going to voluntarily follow and just make sure that everything was prim and proper. And one of those things is that you couldn't show immorality or wrongdoing or criminal activity in a good light.
Oh.
People who did bad things had to be punished on screen.
I see.
And so this is kind of, if you watch older movies, you might notice that, like, and even in children's films today, like, the hero very rarely kills the villain. It's usually like karma comes to get them.
Mm-hmm. They slip and fall.
Exactly.
And this is, I guess, after the era of film noir, which is a very murky, gray world where villains are not punished and heroes are not exemplars of moral conduct. So
yeah,
that's kind of, I guess, the environment out of which the Hays Code is emerging.
Exactly. And so you are not allowed basically to create anti-heroes because your heroes have to be above reproach. Mm-hmm. And so Mr. Toad in the book does in fact steal the motor car. But in this particular adaptation, they had to change it so that he was framed.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I was wondering why that change had been made. It makes him still silly, but a little more upstanding.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of other rules also involved in the Hays Code, not being able to show a lot of things that you couldn't put into a, you know, G-rated kids film today.
Such as?
The use of alcohol, no scantily clad ladies, everyone being above reproach in their courting, no violence, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. When you start to think of the 1950s and married couples had separate twin beds, like, we're getting to that era.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out in subsequent films.
I mean, a lot of Disney films don't really need that to be explored.
Well, you know, be less focus on butts.
There will be fewer butts.
Interesting. It is funny to think of a, you know, relatively prim and proper British children's classic running afoul of the Hays Code.
And yet... that scallywag Mr. Toad.
He is a scallywag through and through.
But we're not allowed to like him if he did anything bad ever.
So, yeah, the film it's a romp. I think it's relatively accurate to the characters of The Wind in the Willows, although Rat in the book is a bit less of a generic British stick in the mud, a bit more of a vibrant character. But it does feel much more antic and Disneyfied. I remember at one point watching an episode of the British stop-motion television series based on The Wind in the Willows, which is very slow and enamored with nature and the world around us. This is very slapstick. But, you know, good fun. Especially maybe when you're not tired and sleepy at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, having never seen this segment before really at all, my only context for this is the Disneyland ride. It was fairly delightful. The thing was, though, that based on the Disneyland ride...
You had kind of a false expectation going into this.
Yeah. I mean, if you've ever been to Disneyland and apparently not been able to get on any other ride, you may have, in fact, gone on Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. And as we all know, the final scene is that you've crashed your car and ended up in hell, or as the Disney employees would have to refer to it as the Inferno.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you end up in hell with devils. So I kept waiting for Mr. Toad to die. And there were so many, like, little false, like, when is it gonna... Oh, and now? Oh, is this it? And then it ended. And I was like, wait, what do you mean? And so I have been researching endlessly trying to figure out...
lives!
I've been trying to figure out, like, how in the world did we get from this film to...
Mr. Toad's Wild Ride as we experience at Disneyland, yeah.
Like, how did we we get that past Disney? I don't...
Maybe that was the original plan, but the Hays Code wouldn't allow it.
No, I don't. That was not in my research at all. Anyway, but I have scoured the internet. I have scoured forum boards, and I have watched many a YouTube video of old ripped DVDs that should not be on the internet. And all I can say is that the Imagineers just thought it would be funny if at the end he got his comeuppance and went to hell. Yeah, that's the most reason anyone could tell me.
Yeah, if anyone can find an Imagineer willing to go on record as to why that decision got made, the world needs to hear it.
I do think it's funny. Like, don't get me wrong, the joke works. I'm just knowing how the Disney brand functions. I'm just like, how did you get that past enough people to get that made?
And how has it stayed there? I'm continually amazed that ride is still in operation, given all of the other things Disneyland has been eager to find room for.
Supposedly, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride is the first finished ride in Disneyland, so it is the first one.
That's not where I would have started.
Well, I think it just was completed first, because a lot of them were more complicated, and it's not the ride that you go through today necessarily, because in the 80s it did get a whole revamp. And they like laid a new track and added a whole bunch of new bits, and they added the part where you go through the fireplace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's one that I've gone to fairly frequently when I've been at Disneyland. Probably mostly just for the kick of, going through hell at Disneyland.
Oh, you ride this one a lot?
I mean, I wouldn't say a lot, but I've been on it multiple times.
I think I've ridden it twice in my entire life, and I've lived next to Disneyland most of my life.
Well, you and I have very different Disneyland priorities, I guess.
Apparently.
So, I don't know, were there any particular parts of this short that were striking to you, that you like?
Going back to, thinking that Mr. Toad was going to die, there's, after he escapes jail and he has the ball and chain still in his foot, and he escapes the policeman by dropping underwater, right? Because he's a frog, and he's like, oh, I'm so smart. And then he realizes he can't move the ball and chain, and he can't swim up to the surface, and they kind of cut away to like what his friends are doing. I was like, wow, that's dark, man.
He drowned off screen.
He drowns off screen. Wow, I can't believe they did. And then he comes, and meets his friends in their little cabin with lots of hygge. Yeah, I thought that was going to be the end for him, and it was not. Nope. I'm glad it's not.
Yeah, that would have been, I think, anticlimactic relative to he, crashes and dies and burrows his way into hell.
Yeah. But may we all have a best friend like Searle, the horse.
Oh, is that the best friend you want here?
Well, I mean...
I want a best friend like McBadger who's gonna, do my taxes, run my affairs, and keep me in order when I am about to squander it all on nonsense.
I mean, do you want friends that are going to imprison you, or do you want friends that are going to break you out of prison? That's the question here, because technically, Rat and Molly put him under house arrest, so they imprisoned him, and then all three of them with McBadger, take him to court and get him thrown in prison, and then the one person who shows up to bust him out is Searle. After, of course, Mr. Toad at the beginning was besties with Searle because he had his cool stagecoach and his cool horse friend, and they went all over the countryside, and they were besties, and then he sees the motor car, and then he ditches Searle. So, after this huge rift in their friendship, Searle still comes for him.
All right, I'll give it to Searle. That is impressive. That is faithfulness. Because, yeah, Mr. Toad just drops him as quickly as possible the minute he sees that motor car.
Yep.
We all know those people. Our best friends until they find a shinier friend.
Oh, that makes me so sad. Anyway, so I feel like those are the things that I remember the most.
I remember McBadger's really, really entertaining Scottish accent. He's dialed that thing up to 500.
Well, okay, so I was curious about this because to my ear, something sounded a little off about Angus McBadger. And so I was like, well, who is this Campbell Grant guy? So I went and looked him up. What else has he done? He's not an actor. He's an artist. So he was an animator on Snow White and a character designer on Pinocchio. He's a story guy on Fantasia. I have no idea how he ended up as Angus McBadger, which is really cool. Do you have any particular moments of Mr. Toad?
No, that's the thing about these shorts, is that they didn't leave that strong of an impression. I do want to live in Toad Hall. It's a very beautiful hall.
Mm-hmm. I did really enjoy the big fight scene in Toad Hall, though, because there were a lot of fun gags, I think, at that portion where you just have all the weasels sleeping around and having to lower Molly by, like, a fishing line to...
And the original Mission Impossible actually took place here in the 40s in The Wind in the Willows.
Exactly. Who knew? And you've got trapdoors and, you know...
Yeah. You definitely get the sense that, you know, the animators at least had a good time with this one.
Yeah. I also like that Rat and Molly come back in Mickey's Christmas Carol. I feel like they get more lines in Mickey's Christmas Carol than they do in this short, but, you know.
Yeah. Definitely one of those moments where you recognize a design from something later that was paying homage to it when you finally get around to the original. And I was like, oh, wait, I know that character. Where do I know that character?
As a kid, I had no context for them whatsoever. I was just like, I don't know who these guys are, but they're here.
Mm-hmm. They make sense within the world.
Yeah. I just couldn't, like, I never found the thing they were from.
Mm-hmm. It was very nice, this film, to finally have some dialogue. I feel like so many of these package films have been narrated to death with the refusal to actually write lines of dialogue and have characters speaking to one another. And this film, you know, still has some very nice narration at the, you know, front and back end at various points, but characters get to talk. There's some lovely performances. It feels more like a not feature-length film, but something that, with some fleshing out, could have been a feature.
Oh, well, it was intended to be. Both of them, I believe, were intended to be features, but because we're in the era where Disney is churning out smaller content as quickly as possible, sticking it all together and sending it out as a movie so he can make a bunch of money back. So these were things that he had purchased the rights in hopes of making them into feature films. But the money wasn't there, so he stuck them together. And he must have finally gotten it after this film because Cinderella is, in fact, a full feature.
Mm-hmm. I at least would be interested to see Disney's feature-length adaptation of The Wind in the Willows. Maybe that has a little more time for the additional stories and more whimsical flights of fancy from that book. But we got this instead.
Yeah.
Well, shall we move on and talk about The Legend of Sleepy Hollow?
Yes. Well, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is narrated by Bing Crosby, which is why it sounds so nice. Mm-hmm. And when Brum sings, as much as I'm like, he's not a great guy, but yes, I will listen to him sing. Mm-hmm. He sounds so nice because
it's a wonderful voice.
It's Bing Crosby.
Go on to narrate lots of Christmas films.
He does it very well.
So it's based on the short story The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, published in 1820 by Washington Irving, an American writer for the second half of this film.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I only know the name Washington Irving because of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle. Apparently he's written other things. Apparently he's very popular in his time. I also didn't know that he was a lawyer and that those two stories I mentioned, Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle, they were 2 stories out of 30 that were all published together in a collection called The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, Gentleman.
Okay.
Here's the thing.
Oh, what's the thing?
These American short stories for which we're like, oh, Washington Irving, you're so amazing. Wow.
Such an iconic American writer.
Yes.
Creator of original American folklore.
They're both based on German folktales.
That is how American culture works.
I just don't understand why we give him, like, so much applause for taking someone else's folktale and being like, I said it in America. We're like, wow, applause. Whereas, like, with Cinderella, we're like, oh my gosh, you know, there's a Cinderella story from every culture. Mm-hmm. And we can't attribute it to one person. I just don't get why he gets so much accolades.
I just want to say you are, you know, asking the question, why are we so impressed when someone takes a fairy tale and sets it in America while sitting next to a Princess and Frog poster?
But I think think making something into a movie that's also hand animated, like, that's a completely different thing. And also, I'm not like, wow, this person who wrote the story is a genius. I'm like, I love the art. I love the way it was changed, but also it comes from this, like, you see very directly and constantly acknowledge what it came from as much as you acknowledge the film. Whereas, like, there's no Washington Irving within The Princess and the Frog that were like, wow, that guy, amazing.
Fair enough.
I love adaptations. That's one of my favorite things, is how you take something, turn it around, upside down, paint it blue, and turn it into something new.
That's how folklore works, is you take a story from another culture and environment and we work it a little bit, make it feel native to your own world. It's just that I guess in the U.S. we like to take it, put our stamp on it, and pretend we made it up ourselves.
That's the part I don't like, though.
Exhibit a democracy.
I mean, I wish there was more credit where credit is actually due.
So, who is the credit actually due to?
Well, I don't know. Germany. Germany.
Thank you, Germany, for The Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Yes, where all of the creepy things come from. Thanks, Germany.
It's true. It does seem like a very German, like Grimm Brothers-esque image now that I think about it. The headless horseman who wanders the woods looking to chop off your head and take it for his own. That would absolutely fit within a Grimm Brothers collection.
Exactly. So what else do you want to talk about in Sleepy Hollow?
Well, it's a story about a gangly, aimless school teacher who really likes food and ends up accidentally courting the most beautiful girl in town.
I thought he was intentionally courting her.
I think that's, it seems like he wouldn't be upset if that was happening, but mostly he just wants to eat.
Like, he also has noticed that she is an attractive person.
That's mainly my memory of the film, is that he's just always very easily distracted by food.
Oh, well, I think, like, that's really why he entertains all of the other women in town, is to get food. But Katrina, he's actually interested in long-term, for more than just food. He doesn't want just one thing from her. He wants two things from her. But
normally it's the attractive one that you say they only want one thing from.
I know. I wish I had loved at least one character in this. Well, okay. Let me rephrase.
You did love one character.
I did love one character. I wish that I had cared about one of the three main characters, but it turns out they're all kind of terrible people in their own special ways.
Yeah. Ichabod's not terrible. He's just kind
selfish and gluttonous and manipulative, which actually would have made him a great match for Katrina, who's also manipulative. So I did not especially love the way that, she treats her suitors. And
they did very well, actually, with the kind of emotional body language portrayals of Katrina, who, nobody in this film really gets much in the way of dialogue, but, they very clearly lay it out through her body language and the staging of scenes that she is actively playing these men against one another to, increase their jealousy and their admiration and adoration.
Yeah, and then Brom, being a precursor to Gaston, didn't really care much for him either. But at least when we get to the end of the film, and, like, spoiler alert, Brom and Katrina get married, I was like, you know what? I'm okay with this. They deserve each other. So, but the one character that I did like doesn't have a name as far as I know. But there is a short woman who wears a green dress, and she just wants to dance.
She just wants to dance.
She's my favorite.
All abandon. She doesn't care who she's dancing with, just someone to dance with.
She's just incredibly earnest and happy and just wants to live happily ever after, and I hope she finds it.
Everyone else, is just paying attention to Katrina, and it's very sad for her.
Yes.
I feel like I've seen other adaptations of Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which I've never read the source material for, which are more explicit in suggesting that Brom goes out and pretends to be the Headless Horseman to scare Ichabod off. I don't feel like this suggests that really at all.
Oh, really? That's where my brain went. I was like, oh, I feel like because you told the story so well, and then he leaves before Ichabod or something like that. It just seems like, oh, I feel like you just went to hide in the woods and when conveniently Ichabod was never seen again, Brom marries Katrina. I'm just like, I think I know what happened, you guys. I think he just got rid of the competition.
It's very impressive that Brom is able to change the way, color and light work around him when he turns into the Headless Horseman.
I mean, have you heard him sing? He is magic.
I mean, that song about the Headless Horseman is pretty great.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic.
That is a segment I would definitely rewatch.
That was the most fun part of this segment, I would say. All right. Well, I think it's time for a Guess Who.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Who? Tell me who.
Well, we're going to try things a little differently this time. I'm going to give you the name of the actor, and I'm going to tell you what else he has played, and this time you are going to guess who he is in this movie.
All right.
All right. So today we're talking about J. Pat O'Malley, who has been in a lot of Disney films. So he was the Walrus and the Carpenter and Tweedledee and Tweedledum in Alice in Wonderland. He is Colonel Hathie the Elephant and Buzzy. I don't know who Buzzy is in the Jungle Book. Forgot to look that up. He is Jasper in 101 Dalmatians, and also the Colonel, who's the shaggy sheepdog who gets the alarm when the puppies go missing. He lives at the farmhouse with the horse and the cat. Cool. Great.
I remember him.
He's also Otto in Robin Hood. And I was like, who's Otto?
Otto?
Otto is the old dog with the broken leg in a cast who has the crutch. You remember him?
Does he get any lines of dialogue?
Yes, he does, apparently. And he's also in Mary Poppins as the pearly drummer, master of the hounds, and the huntsman in that animated scene with supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Great. So now that you know who he's played, who is he in this movie?
Well, there's not a lot of characters that get dialogue in this movie.
That's why I thought I'd make it easy on you.
Have to be in The Wind of the Willows. I'm going to go with Molly.
No.
Well, I know it's not McBadger. So he could be a weasel. He could be a judge. Could be Cyril.
He's Cyril!
Ah!
Yes, he has. I wouldn't have put it together myself, actually, but now that I think about it, he did sound a bit like Tweedledee and Tweedledum, which I think has the most sustained dialogue of any character. Just
that
because
makes sense, yeah.
They
now that I think about it.
talk in like several pages at once, whereas most other characters just get a line here and there. Yeah.
Okay, so he's Cyril.
He's Cyril!
Cool. No wonder you like Cyril so much.
Yes, I am slightly more biased towards him now, because Pat O'Malley's pretty cool. Well, so Disney has never done any sequels, but there is a live-action Wind in the Willows with everyone from Monty Python.
I'm curious, but not really, how a live-action Wind in the Willows works.
And in 1999, Paramount did Sleepy Hollow, directed by Tim Burton, who, spent some time at Disney. And that one starred Johnny Depp and Christina Ricci.
I have seen that one. It's rather a bit longer.
It is a bit. I haven't actively watched it, but it has been on while I was at a party. And that's...
that's my experience as well.
Yeah. You
It's
were
probably
at
the
that
same
party.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We go places together. So...
Not now. Now we stay at home.
Now we stay at home.
Together.
We could also then watch that movie together.
We could. I'm not anxious enough already.
So Nathan, what do you think the moral of the Wind in the Willows portion is?
Cars are bad.
For the environment, for you, for your mental health.
I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously, the basic moral of The Wind of the Willows is don't chase a fad to your own ruin and listen to your wise friends. Have a balanced approach to life. Otherwise, you're going to get locked in prison, have to escape by dressing in drag and nearly drowning, and then fight off a bunch of weasels to return to your home.
I hate it when weasels invade my home.
I mean, most people do, yeah. You definitely need to bring out animal control for that.
Yeah. All right. Do you have a moral for the Legend of Sleepy Hollow?
Just, I don't know, ignore shallow people and let them, ruin one another.
Go home early from the party. My mother's advice was that you should always leave a party when it's like hit the peak and everyone's having the best possible time. That is when you say your goodbyes, make your exit, because then people will only remember you during the like, wow, they're always there during the best part and not like remember you during the doldrums, I guess.
And then if you leave during the peak of the party, you can sneak out early, dress yourself as a headless horseman, and scare off your chief romantic rival.
I mean, I was thinking that if Ichabod had left early, he would have made it home okay, but he was gluttonously eating as much as he possibly could and stayed too late. And that's why he disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, that works too.
Mm-hmm.
You can also waylay people in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
Don't lose your head.
Too late.
All right. I think that is just about everything.
All right, so that's going to wrap it for the adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad and the package film era!
Amazing! Yay!
Next, we finally return to a complete feature-length story, and it's a good one, Cinderella.
I'm really excited about the next couple of films that are coming up because, like, these are the Disney classics that I think I watched over and over again, and this is, like, those films that I think of when we were deciding if we want to do this podcast or not. I'm like, but I just want to talk about Alice in Wonderland forever.
Yeah, it's going to be an Alexa solo episode where you mostly hear the sound of me nodding.
You're not wrong.
I am really in it for Sleeping Beauty, which, is still some films away, but
she's coming up. She's coming up. Yeah, I mean, you know what's really interesting to me is that, like, this is episode 11, and we've only had one Disney princess. Mm-hmm. Whereas, like, nowadays we think of the Disney princess as such a huge part of, like, what is Disney. And it's taken us, more than a decade to 2 decades, really, to even establish a trope because we only have one.
Yeah. Well, and I think we'll talk more about it next episode, but I feel like it's definitely a case of Walt saying, all right, it's time to restart. It's time to do something big. Let's revisit what worked about our very first film. We'll return to princesses.
Princesses. Very excited about Cinderella. All right. Well, see you guys next time.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed our podcast, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast player. You can write us at retroscoping@gmail.com or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as Retroscoping. And as always, go live happily ever after. We've probably seen the last of Jiminy, haven't we?
Probably. Which means we've graduated. We no longer need a conscience.
He was a terrible conscience anyway. I guess it depends on whether we do a special episode on Mickey's Christmas Carol.
But then he's not a conscience. He's a ghost. Which is what happened in the original Pinocchio.
He died, finally. I mean, crickets do have a limited lifespan.
No, that was your fun fact about the original Pinocchio, is that Pinocchio kills him and he comes back as a ghost to keep consciencing.
Oh, yeah. That does make Mickey's Christmas Carol very faithful to the source material, doesn't it?
Yep. There you go.
Multiple source materials.